Fi Fo Fum, AhSa-Ti is our guest to come. When she sings you will be hooked, 'cause they're a giant who's been overlooked. Welcome to Live and Queer, QCC's Queer Art Show. I'm your host, Maya Chinchilla, and today we have musician and filmmaker AhSa-Ti Nu on the show. Be quiet. AhSa-Ti's film Overlooked Giants was one of the highlights of last year's National Queer Arts Festival, so we're really excited to share a clip from it later on in the show. She's in the process of turning it into a stage play. Yeah, I know, it's very exciting. So stay tuned for all of that. I'm sorry, folks. Apparently, the nursery rhyme I read to Chorizo didn't put him to sleep. So let me see if I can quiet him down before we get to AhSa-Ti. Hang on just one second. Okay, Chorizo, one last nursery rhyme, all right? And then you take a nap while Mama gets to work, okay? Here we go. The itsy bitsy doggy watched a YouTube show. Someone subscribed and the show began to grow. Other people liked it and shared it with their friends. The itsy bitsy doggy watched the show again. That's a good boy. All right, you be good now. Now the chorizo's calm, let's bring on AhSa-Ti. AhSa-Ti Nu, everyone. So good to see you. Welcome.
So good to see you. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you about all your projects. But first, let's take a look at a clip from your project, Overlooked Giants.
My hope for love and peace had me blinded in ways I could not see the roadblock in front of me. In the midnight hour, the moon came and she spoke to me. She coddled me in her salty waters and whispered in my ear all of the things that you neglected to tell me. Fear of loving me was a real thing, and so she poured the nectar over my eyes so that I could see me clearly. Cleansed, reborn, shape-shifted am I. Love, orgasms, breath, touch. I have found God in all of this. God is all of this, and I am all of these.
In the Youth Authority, particularly within women's group, we form families. It's very different than the male facilities, but we form families, and that's real serious families of being protected and just being a part of a lot of emotional support from these women. And we took on the role models of mother, father, I'm your uncle, you're my cousin, and we really played those roles out to a T. And so when I got out first, and I got back to the streets, and that's when I wanted to identify as being gay. So back then we called them stud broads. It wasn't butches, amongst the black people, at least with my circle of friends. So it wasn't a butch, I was a stud broad. And as a stud broad, I changed my name to Ray.
She was a girl filled with dreams and such. Born in a time when the world said she couldn't be much. Her story, like most, she found heaven in the notes. Her brother mother sang a song and she played along. But oh, life came and filled the shame. And oh, how her anger fueled the pain. Wearing dresses really wasn't her bag. Her mother demanded, so she stepped into that rag. Still dreaming of days when she could climb trees. But now's the time to put someone else's heart at ease. She found love in the fire, a new family that held her close. This new life helped to loosen all those ropes. But oh, she couldn't help but notice her body in the room. And oh, how her flower still struggles to bloom. This is a story of race and how she came to be who they are today. This is a story of race and how they came to be who she is today. This is a story of race and how he came to be.
Wow, that was gorgeous. I mean, it's just dripping with so much beautiful imagery and the music. And, you know, I love to linger on, some butch aesthetics. So, yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that song?
Yeah, sure. So it was inspired. Over the course of the past probably 5 years now, I've been interviewing women of color who identify as queer. And that story was inspired by a vocalist. She's a jazz vocalist, Anne Maria. And she shared that story of this sort of transformation that she went through in her youth. And I started to imagine what it would be like for her and for really any of us to be able to sort of have that freedom. I thought about the times when, I would sing in the mirror with a hairbrush and do all of those things. And I started to imagine what it would be like for this, young girl who's trying to find herself, but to be able to have that freedom to sort of explore herself, her sexuality, the clothes that feel comfortable with her, the way in which her appearance feels comfortable. And, especially at the age of 11, 12, 13, when you're really trying to figure out who am I and what is going on with my body and all of these things.
For real.
And so it was that was more so the inspiration with that, was just sort of me imagining if in my youth, if I had the freedom to sort of explore in the way that I really wanted to, what would that look like?
That's really great. I mean, bringing in your skills as a musician and the imagery and the interviews. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more broadly about what the title Overlooked Giants means, what it means to you and its meaning for the project?
Really just thinking about all of the artists that I know who are queer, who are these fabulous musicians, painters, writers, film directors, and how oftentimes they are pigeonholed sort of into this category of, you know, you really can't be fully out there. You really can't fully be in the industry. How and thinking about this talent and the fact that they're overlooked in such a way because the world just won't see them because they're comfortable in their sexuality.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad that you're doing this project. Can you tell us a little bit about the character Ray? They talk about being a stud broad, versus butch. If you could tell us a little bit about language, I mean, any sort of specific community terms and its importance, because I love all that language, and especially when it's, chosen by the South.
It's interesting. As I was interviewing these women, the generation definitely showed the language and the way in which we've shifted the language over the past several years. And so, the first time when I interviewed her and she was sharing that term stud broad, I was like, I've never heard of that.
No, yeah.
I mean, and then listening to, just some of the other older women and some of the terms that originally were considered derogatory in some way. So, butch, femme, dyke, bull dagger, all of these terms that were later on embraced by the community. And then looking at just the transition of how it is that we've gone from, butch, bull, all of those things into now just sort of this umbrella of queer. And I think the most interesting part was a lot of the older women that I interviewed, they really were not comfortable with the term queer.
Yeah.
And it's funny how that difference, in terms of now, if someone were to be called a muff diving bull dagger, right, we would be offended. And ready to fight,
really?
right?
Okay.
Some of us would, but then, and
I might be excited, but
Right.
that's probably because of my experience. Yeah. But
Yeah.
somebody outside of the community. Right.
Exactly.
For sure.
Right. They might be offended, but then when you look at the older generation, they are offended by the term queer. And, because the definition of queer and the way that was presented, 20 years ago was completely different. And so I just found it very interesting, this sort of parallel in the language, and also, ultimately this sort of beauty in terms of just adopting and sort of embracing what was meant to break us down to become something that became our good, right? Something that we were able to embrace and say, yeah, I'm all of those things and I'm still fabulous.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of those terms coming specifically from either working class or people of color communities. And I think that's important to note. And also as a way of calling yourself and signifying to others, how to find each other. I love all those terms, and I can see how the umbrella terms can erase some of that specificity. So I'm really appreciative that we're having this conversation, because the intergenerational struggle is real, and we need to continue having those conversations. Mm-hmm. So in that same section, Ray also implied that their coming out or their sexuality had maybe a fluidity to it, or changed over time. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because sometimes we don't talk about that either. We just, sometimes we just tell these stories of I came out this way and I'm exactly who I am always,
Right. Well, I think it goes really back to what you mentioned before, in just terms of, especially within communities of color, we have this tendency to sort of shift and to progress and to discover ourselves. And I think a lot of that, particularly in this country, it comes with the fact that we're constantly having to shapeshift and code switch. And so because of that, we find new ways to embrace ourselves in our communities. The other side of that is also, I think, listening to a lot of these stories, there's now an openness that we have in the queer community that really just didn't exist, 20, 30 years ago. And so I think it's sort of broadened the views of some of these women, because now it's like, yeah, thinking back on it, and there are several women that shared, thinking back on their childhood, they probably would have been called they, rather than she or he. And so, and I just think that's a beautiful thing, to be able to have that openness, and even if it's later in life, but to be able to understand that you don't necessarily have to fit into a box. And so many of us generally don't fit into that box. And so being able to now look at yourself as an adult and say, I really don't have to fit in any of that. I can be any of these things because they're all a part of who I am. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a child, I thought of myself as a tomboy, and I aspired. I was like, I want to be like boys. They have all the power, And then later on, I mean, other people started to call me femme before I embraced that kind of, and I play around with it, but sometimes it's about kind of like attracting who I want to attract. Sometimes it's about empowering and feeling empowered in femininity and not seeing it as a weakness. And yeah, it's all play. And I feel like sometimes the rigidity that comes from our experiences and wanting to feel like empowered, but at the same time, it's just so much more fluid than that. And maybe as human beings, we just want fixed categories so we don't have to be challenged. But I love that you're challenging it and that you're documenting this, in your work, and such a creative with the images. I really love that. So what has it been like to adapt the work that you've already been doing with Overlooked Giants into another medium? I mean, are there some similarities? Are there some challenges into making it into a stage adaptation?
It's been an interesting process, just in the sense of having to think and go deeper, in terms of thinking about characters and thinking about the backstories of the characters, and really how to build this, into something that has a little bit more meat to it, if you will. So that process has been just shifting the thinking around, because in the film there was really just a single character that we were focusing on. There were other parts to it, and we certainly had other people that were involved, but we were really just focusing on this young woman who was growing up to become a woman. And so, really that's the same central theme. And so that's really where the parallel is. But then thinking about how we bring these other characters to life on stage, and how we sort of give reference to, and who's the antagonist, who's the protagonist, right? Thinking
right.
about all of those things, while still holding on to that message of, really, which is the premise of the story, is that this young girl who is trying to understand what it means to be a young girl of color in this country, trying to understand what it is to be a girl, trying to understand, what it is to be an artist, and having all of these sort of notions projected on her, to her, in terms of how she should be. And, I'm sure you can understand, when you wanted to play with G.I. Joe and you got Barbie instead, right? So,
right. I'm like, I want to be Luke Skywalker.
Right. And then on top of that, maybe the Barbie that you got was a white Barbie, right? And so it wasn't even like a Barbie that you could identify with. And so just navigating all of that, and then the beauty of the art is that you can express yourself in such a way where there's just such a sense of freedom that comes with that. And you know, bringing all that onto stage, it's an interesting process to say the least, but I'm grateful for it because it's pushing me to stretch as a person, as an artist, and to really think outside of the box in terms of how to achieve that.
And so are you on stage, or you're bringing in actors, or how's that going?
So it will be actors. You know, the beautiful thing about this piece is that it's primarily going to be a dance piece. I really, all right. I'm a dancer like in the club. I'm not a professional right. dancer by any means.
Yeah.
Like you give me some good house music and I can get it, but you know.
Right.
But I am so inspired by the movement of body and the way in which we're able to convey so much of our story just through our bodies, through the movement of our hips, our arms, etc. And so the primary focus really is going to be a dance piece. And so, I mean, really think about, you know, an Alvin Ailey piece with some dialogue is really what I'm going for here. So I'll be partnering with a dance company. I can't quite say who it is just yet because we've not necessarily signed the contract.
Okay.
I'll be partnering with a professional dance company and a fabulous choreographer, and really pulling this piece together so that visually you are just as enticed as you are with the music that's being played and the dialogue that's happening. So I just want to make it like a whole smorgasbord. So when people walk out, they're like, that was all the things. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I hope there's some clothing also involved, because I just love that. I love that process of what's underneath, what's the armor, all of it, you know? And is there something personal about this for you? Do you play with any of those terms yourself, or has that language changed over time for you?
I could say the most personal thing for me, part of the reason why I even started this project was my father's a preacher and rather conservative when it came to religion. And for the longest time, I struggled with which pronouns to use for myself. Even in terms of the music that I was writing, I struggled to which pronouns to use for who I was writing the song about. It was a big struggle. And I had really moved past that, or at least I thought I did, until I had gone to do a show, and my dad was there. And this was really the first time that he had seen me live. And so I found myself changing the pronouns. Like I sort of reverted to this childhood place where I felt like I needed to protect myself. And then once the show was done, I really had to sit and think, why was that? What was that all about? And I don't want that to happen again. And so then I started to think about some of the other artists that I knew and wondered what their stories were and if they had the same struggle. And so honestly, a lot of this was for my own therapeutic treatment, if you will, in terms of reaching out to community to find out, what their story was and if they had the same struggle that I had experienced. And sure enough, they all did. And it was, so this project has honestly been for me to put it out into the world to say, hey, this is a thing that happens, but B, also just for myself in terms of healing and therapy for myself.
Yeah. And and for me, it's compelling and entertaining. And, even the parts that I've seen, I'm really drawn into it. And I see that we often we have those questions and we think we're all alone, but there's so many other people who are thinking about these. And thank goodness we have the internet, though, to help us connect with some other folks as well. Yeah. But so what does it have to do? I saw a little bit that somebody calls you the female Marvin Gaye. Where's that coming from?
Well, that was actually, that was a fabulous comment that I had received from a radio DJ. And when he said it, I was like, what? Oh my God, thank you. Keep saying more, keep talking. Like, yeah. So, but it was from my first album, which was called my first solo album, should I say, which was entitled Reborn. And, I tend to, when he and I talked about it, he said, you really tend to push on what it means to talk about the things that are happening to the people in the margins, the folks that are telling the stories of the folks that really don't get their stories told, and just sort of opening this doorway in terms of also, I love a good lovemaking song because you can't go wrong with that. So I think I think if I were to surmise why it is that he came to that conclusion, that would probably be it.
Okay. All right. So the music, yes, that we need to have that on our playlist for the sexy times.
Yes.
Good to note. And it really seems like with your inspirations with this project, could you tell us more broadly about like your desire to, or what you think about the need for queer art, and especially from people of color?
Really, it is about how we create opportunity for everyone, right? And how do we create opportunity for those who are most marginalized, who are living on the edges and trying to find their way into the light, if you will, into the spotlight? And how do we make space for that? And I think a lot of that comes from some other folks moving out the way. I'm just going to be honest. And really providing space for those things to happen, because there are so many rich stories that exist. And there are so many layers. And I had someone ask me, well, why am I specifically focusing on queer women of color in the arts? Why not just queer women? And, the reality is there are some different factors that come into play. And it's not to say that queer white women don't face opposition, but it is to say that, in the reality, when I walk into a room, the first thing that people see is the color of my skin. I don't care if you're one of those people that's like, I don't see color, which is absolutely ridiculous because we all see color, but that's just me. But the first thing you're going to see is the color of my skin. The second thing you'll probably notice is my gender. And just then you've already put me in two categories. And most of the time, unfortunately, depending on the room that you walk in, those categories are going to be negative. They're going to be of some sort of stereotype that does not lift me up, right? And so, especially as artists, I think we get overlooked so often because unless we're willing to show certain parts of our bodies, unless we're willing to sort of follow along whatever the industry standard is, then, you're not even considered before they even see your work or hear your work. And so that's why I think that it's important, is just to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that we're not given these opportunities because these are the first things that they see. And then on top of that, when they find out that we're queer, then it's like, oh, that's just way too much. That's 3 strikes. You're out. Like, so, I think it's beautiful that we've created communities for ourselves to be able to showcase our work and to be able to do those things. But I do think that now it's time for us to step outside of that and to push people into bringing us into the spotlight in the way that we deserve, because there's some beautiful, beautiful work that exists. And, quite frankly, it's time for people to hear it from us.
Thanks so much for joining us, AhSa-Ti. It has been a pleasure talking to you. AhSa-Ti is currently working on a stage adaptation of her movie Overlooked Giants, and she has some music shows coming up. So check out her site, AhSa-Ti Nu.com, to get the updates. She also has a Patreon, so throw some coins her way to get her to support her work if you can. And links for everything will be in the description. And don't forget to like and share and subscribe to help this show grow giant. To encourage you, we're going to leave you with one last song.
Like and share, do 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 do. Like and share, do 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 do. Like and share, do 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 do. Like and share.
Subscribe now, do 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 do. Subscribe now, do 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 do. Subscribe now, do 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 do. Subscribe now. See you soon, do 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 do. See you soon, do 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 do. See you soon, do 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 do. See you soon. Okay.